We have in our curriculum the term that we've coined out some times ago called jaded seeker. Jaded seeker, not because he wears jade, because he's tired, she's tired. And the only way to get justified all the years spent chasing enlightenment is to settle on these non-dual axioms. Simply settle on them at a mental level, which brings certain relief. You see? It brings certain relief that indeed all there is that. Yes, of course, all there is that. There's nothing other than that. One can never be closer nor further away to one's essence. That should set one free there and then. But enlightenment altogether is something else.
So I'm going to take the invitation to ask something personal, but it also relates to mastery and power. So when I was young, as long as I can remember, I was driven by enlightenment. I read about these yogis and wanted to be enlightened. And throughout my life, I've done many, many things towards that end, towards that goal. And I would say that I was probably very dedicated to that for my life. And then more recently, I've kind of accepted that I'm human and I live a full, rich life. I've got a lot of great things in my life, and I'm happy with that. And also many of the teachers along the way in history who have, you said that mastery is about power. Many of those teachers who have had that power have abused that power. But my question really is, how do I now, like you said something earlier about Shakti, and when that Shakti flows through you fully, you're free from conditions. And that's always what I've chased and sought. But I've kind of recently been more at peace with not finding that, but you're kind of encouraging me to go for it. So how do I balance that kind of striving with acceptance?
Okay. So let's begin first with clarifying so that there's no misunderstanding slips in from get-going. I've never said that mastery is about power. This is where attention is required and making a distinction. When we went through the etymology of master and mastery, we traced the term in terms of its, let's say, not exactly transmutation, because the root, the original meaning was always there. But the emphasis, let's say, how people used that term. The term master in the ancient usage, ancient, as we would say, again, my memory is a bit rusted there, maybe back to the 12th, 13th century, England, maybe 14th century, even up to, this term was used, master. Even when we watch these movies, right, or read the books, the term and the way the word master was used back then was different than it was already used, let's say, throughout the ensuing centuries, 16 to 17, like after the so-called Age of Enlightenment, after all the, French Revolution and everything. So the kind of, it became anachronistic to use it in that way. And the term master began to exemplify something else, someone who is excellent at their skills. If prior to that, only, let's say, a master would be either someone who represents religious authority or someone who is powerful enough, like a powerful lord, right, in medieval England and onwards. So distinction was even made how the emphasis on power gave way to responsibility. Remember that part? So that mastery here began to exemplify as that inseparable term from master. Something which is, again, infused with, I would say, what comes in response as a service, in being of service, rather than how originally perhaps mastery was spoken about. I would even suggest that this might have happened in various different countries and cultures. In India, in Japan, how when we go deep into the shogunate periods, when the shogun won, right, and won second time, the most militant phase in the Japanese history, how that term, right, the Lord, went through permutations and then kind of gained different connotations towards the waning of that era, when the class of warriors, there was no use for them, because Japan was unified under a single emperor, and the emperor decided to modernize Japan, to open it to the world. I don't want us to get lost there, but I wanted to make this very important distinction, because I said that power is the most important thing. No. Yes, it was given in the first evening there. Simply it felt fitting to throw in the martial arts, right? Dan, Li, and Kung Fu, which stands for, effectively speaking, yes, right? Or Dan, right? Your name shortened. And then Li, we have Li here. Where is he? Right? Li is there. And then Kung Fu. And this stands for that exactly. See? It stands for courage, power, and skill. Skill comes third. But back to your inquiry and where you are now, where you're finding yourself, right? All your life you were driven by the idea of enlightenment. Since you have that, let's say, by the invitation to make this very private, right? As opposed to, let's say, how the encouragement is to bring this outside of the exclusively personal inquiries. But I would also then take license and reflect back to you my own story, because this may additionally gives you some kind of insights that you're perhaps looking for. And in contrast to your story, I never had the idea of enlightenment in my life. I didn't even know what that is. I'm being honest, I was too preoccupied with what was there immediately in the field of my awareness, using that teacher's language, that it's kind of like a language that develops over the time. And, so if you want to teach, just develop the language and you'll fool everyone. Special tricks in a book from master training, proper. So not only that, somewhere I confessed not long ago, close to like maybe this year, maybe last year, that I first time heard the word meditation when I was like, you wouldn't believe it, probably, when I was after my military service in St. Petersburg already as a student at the Academy of Fine Arts. I grew up in Tashkent. I've never heard the word meditation. I did not come across the word meditation, full stop. Yeah, maybe I heard it, but it didn't meditation, no. And we had these huge rooms, like similar to this, like let's say stately house rooms in the academy. And of course they were divided, partitioned. And it was this room, huge room, and partitioned in half. And some guys were on one side, and we, like let's say from my hometown, guys from Uzbekistan, from Tashkent, the three of us were on this side. And of course, occasionally, we will be sort of like throwing over the partition, like whatever, like, shh, like, can you get quiet? Or like turn the music a notch down. It's like, So, and the guy one of the guys who was across there was into Krishna movements, into the ISKCON Foundation. It was Hare Krishna, right? So of course, like he had this tuft of hair, and I didn't pay attention to that. My hair was all the way down here, and it's like bushy, and like everyone looked different because we're artists. So I didn't even think it has religious connotation. I thought, well, it doesn't even look that cool, right? So, and one day I hear this talking, and they're like, meditation. And I was doing something else. I was sitting maybe on my bed, and just like, I was struck like with this thunderbolt, literally like the story of that peasant who came from the south to the north. You know what I mean? I was born in the south. Central Asia, that's way south. St. Petersburg to way north. Do you know that story I'm talking about? No. It's a iconic story how this simple guy from the south of China comes to northern China to study, right? And so he basically finds his way there. One day, when he was in the forest cutting wood, there were monks probably passing by or something like, and he had overheard the conversation. And one of them used that word, right? Chan, meditation. And he never knew this word, so he ran after this, guys, please, I'm sorry for intrusion. Could you tell me what that word you just said? It makes my heart flutter. It's just like, they looked at each other and just, what this guy's like, and they just, of course, they, probably like had fun of him and took a fun, but they said to him, look, just, you see this? Just keep going towards that mountain, whatever, and keep going until you hit the property there, and that's where you can find out more. And he did just that, abandoned everything and ran, and it's like how he met the master there, the grandmaster, not even knowing, in the forest. He stumbled on him, who had his walk there, and he was asking whereabouts and how to approach people here, because he had this word and it really, really feels important to him. And how he sent to the kitchen and spent all this. He became one of the great masters of Zen. Great masters of Zen. He was given, in fact, the mantle of lineage, which caused a revolt in China at the time, in that particular, not revolt in China, it's like, in that particular, let's say, monastery, that particular lineage, because the guys who were coming from illustrious families, educated, obviously, aristocrats, nobility of their time, gave their entire life. And suddenly, when the Grand Master is about to breathe his last, he just, annoys another guy who was in the kitchen for the last 10 years, because he is the carrier of the lineage. And of course, the chase begins, because as soon as the Grand Master, drifts into the land of Vaikunta, they're like, we're going to get you, man. And he just runs from them, and gets to the, then he runs out of breath, and he holds this whole thing, all the paraphernalia, and he's just, what the heck? Why am I running? These guys want this. What is this? Why? I've got myself into trouble. I don't care, really. With this, without, it doesn't make no difference. So he stops running and waits for them there. And they approach, folks, you want this? Here, catch it. And they're like, they grab this whole thing and they stand there and they were vicious. They were ready to beat him up even. If anything, how dare you can run away from us, you dirty peasant. and then, of course, they realize in that very moment, the guy, particularly the one who was hoping to receive this, he holds this and he realizes the utter ridiculousness of the situation. He realizes that the carrier of Zen tradition is there, unattached to this, totally free of all that. standing there, and that's why he was chosen. And this doesn't mean nothing. It's like, do you want to be a dragon warrior? Remember that? Where is point? Dragon warrior, Kung Fu Panda. Remember the second, the thing this up there, right? Have you watched Kung Fu Panda? First one. Well, the first one gives it all. The rest is just a repetition. So the same thing, like open the scroll, back, front. What the heck? Where's the secret? The secret is like with the soup, secret ingredient of his dad, stepdad. So before I lose everyone, not exactly the same, but when I read it, I had a good giggle because I had that word meditation. And I was already after military, I was a tough guy, like really. I was in the military, I was pumping up iron. You're into sports, right? You work with sportsmen. I was with elite athletes in my first half a year, and later on was working out with guys like, champions of judo and like names I name, you wouldn't know them. Back in the days, they were known outside of Soviet Union, Bubka's brother was there. The many, yeah. Also the wrestlers, these guys from not Dagestan, from Chechnya, Chechens, the Khadartsev. Khadartsev was he was demobilized a year before me, so like I just overlapped, and I trained with these guys, and I was already before that had the nickname Bruce Lee in my hometown, not because I was kicking this and that. No, I was a painter, but my mentor taught me boxing, right? And I had my nose broke, and I knew how to be in the street if need be, and like I just liked physical culture because I grew up very skinny, sick boy. But I never heard of enlightenment, and I never thought of enlightenment. To me, there was nothing lacking in life, absolutely nothing lacking that I would want to go for until the suffering starts to creep in. So when that, for example, word was uttered there across the whole thing, it made it even more poignant because it wasn't even spoken somewhere. I overheard it somewhere. So it was like in a voyeuristic way of overhearing that. And it's not like we have internet, Google, and computer. No. And no, it's not like I can go to the library now and tell me about meditation. So when we get together with my buddies, and a good friend of mine with whom I grew up, and my wife Amrita Madhavi met him, Gairat. He was from that beautiful family. His father was a famous artist, and he's the guy who introduced me to other than Deep Purple and whatever, like King Crimson and all this progressive rock and, Jethro Tull and all that stuff. And Gairat, and I cannot just say, do you know what meditation is? Because it's just like my pride doesn't allow me. So we talk about something there, this and that. It's like, it's like meditation. I just like say that. And then my guys are, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? I said, well, okay, you don't like it? So why? Tell me why reason. So I want a conversation. I want to know what meditation is. You don't understand. I don't think you hear me. I never heard the term meditation. I knew what it means, but it was not there in the field of my experience, awareness. And suddenly, and I was already 22-year-old. Okay? That's when I first heard the word meditation. And suddenly, this other dimension kind of introduced itself. And of course, it will take some time before I would end up in London and in the summer of 1991 and, begin or continue rather with my explorations, because before that it was in Warsaw, making my way from, this was the collapse of Soviet Union, all this. It's like a different system, learning to, learning constantly, seeing, observing. And the build-up of stress, of course, build-up of stress until one day I was, I don't know, washing the bathroom to take a bath. My third vertebra going boom, and it's like stars pop out of my eyes, and I was still keeping it fit. Run, Paddington Green, go there for a run, joined this guy from Nigeria, kickboxer, and we would always go and work out together. I will show him something, he will show me something. It's always fun to exercise together, isn't it? I never liked gym; it's too smelly, and never liked machines, and like what today they call calisthenics, right? And suddenly I'm crippled. I'm I can't move, I can't put socks in the morning. So this is my beginning. So no enlightenment, never wanted to be enlightened, never knew what it means. But of course, it led to very strong rise of some sentiment, and I'm cutting this short so as not to take all the time, where it came to, I had to catch up very quickly on this whole thing. Very quickly. Of course, I started read everything I could lay my hands on ferociously. And life also presented me with connections, and so the postural yoga by then, mid-90s in UK started to take over, right? Quite a bit. So in no time I ended up in the ashram and all that. So, and then even then, to me, it wasn't about enlightenment. Guys talk about it, and I'm listening like that peasant from the south, what do they even mean by enlightenment? But then, of course, this book, that book. This would make sense to you why this teaching as it is. Because when the actual event took place in my mid-30s, the main realization there and then was, that's who I ever was. I was never other than that. Never. See? You want me to spice it up a little bit with some mystery because you got used to it. You've been at Sadhguru, right? So that would not be a novelty, right? And let us spice it up for you, right? I'm not going to go back into many incarnations. I'm not going to do that. But I will tell you that many astrologists and psychics confirmed that things happened already in the past life. All happened in the past life. The memory of awakened Kundalini was in the past life. It was simply meant to be picked up to continue here. So therefore, the idea even of the Enlightenment, the idea was not there. Art was that. Self-expression, creativity. And to me, creativity had always spiritual dimension before I even knew the term spiritual and what it represents. It simply had that. And the confirmations were very interesting. When I was in Poland, still as a very young artist, making my first ways out, really in that world of capitalism, straight from the academy, not knowing how to make a living, not knowing how all this works, just going from here to there, trying to make my way. And I've met this wonderful man who was an art critic and journalist, Andrzej Matynia. And he was very well established in these circles. He knew, by the way, personally, he was his friend, Pope Paul II, who was Polish, the one who was assassinated. Short, remember that that Pope, who was from Krakow. He knew Tadeusz Kantor, the greatest film theater director of avant-garde theater director of Poland. He knew Salvador Dali, and he knew very well Anthony Tapies, who was at the time greatest living Spanish artist. In fact, he's the first Spanish artist who enjoyed museum during his lifetime. Even Picasso did not have that privilege. No Dali, no Miro. But Anthony Tapies had museum to his name while he was still alive. And his art had nothing in comparison to mine. Nothing. And he was an established artist and I was just a beginner. But Andrei told me there is a great similarity between what you do, and he helped me he basically made 2 shows for me happen. And that's how I came to London with that. But to cut the story short, he said, you have exactly that same sensibility, that spiritual dimension. In fact, painting is only a medium for you, really. And I was listening to him, it's like someone tells you about you as they're supposed to know more than you know about yourself. So I'm like taking that and like, okay, well, what, fine, but I still need to make my living. I still need to make sense out of all this. And of course, it only made sense in retrospect. So to answer your inquiry, these ideas of enlightenment are great as long as they don't eclipse the enlightenment. As long as they don't eclipse the really purpose and what enlightenment represents. And on top of that, there's a lot of perplexing conversations going on out in the spiritual circles. What I mean by perplexing is that it will sound a little bit maybe unfair because it will have to be accompanied by actually mentioning the names, but there are very, very well-established people out there whose names are known in households, their household names, who today, not as far as last week, for example, just giving it as an example, speak of something like, if someone says they're enlightened, it's a sure sign they're not enlightened, right? Or someone else says there is no such thing as enlightenment because it's not the person who gets enlightened. Person never gets enlightened. And so there are many different spins on that, see? And non-duality itself as a movement, that movement of 3 decades, since the early 90s, one of the key feature is that there's no one to get enlightened, right? There's no one to get enlightened. So this is what I mean by all this perplexing conversation. So someone like yourself, or anyone else for that matter, coming with because when you started speaking about that, I thought, interesting, where will you take that? Because it could have been taken in different ways. And I was wondering, will you take it that way or not? Like when you were speaking, and I was already sensing into where the fork can go. And it could have gone into, is there enlightenment to begin with? Aren't you curious? Is there enlightenment to begin with? Or is it some kind of something that simply belongs to the cultural kind of conversation, something that came to represent that what effectively speaking is, by definition, doesn't exist. Have you ever reflected on this? Have you ever pondered on reality of enlightenment? I'm asking that in turn, but that could have been your inquiry. And yet your inquiry, to me, is much more interesting because you not even asking anything, you're simply presenting this, right? How, where you come to peace almost, right? With what otherwise was the driving force, this passion, this something, right? And as far as I understand, it's not out of scarcity that something is lacking in your life and you have to get that as well. Because a lot of successful people out there, some of them I've met, or they consider themselves successful, who, effectively speaking, decided to just raise the plank, right? And enlightenment, therefore, became that kind of like a project, that, as Ken Wilber called it, like Atman Project. It's a very cool title of the book, right? It's right, Ken Wilber's really cool. He's still cool, but I don't know why he's wearing this wig. It's a bit confusing for people. But I always liked his style. It's a very cool style. He always dressed well, always like a true hippie. Not the hippie from the 60s, but like hippie of the 90s. The Japanese designers. Ripped clothes, but they're expensive. You can't rip them yourself like that. It takes lifetime to be ripped purposefully and skillfully. So, the trick in the book for MTP, right? How to appear confusingly, defeatingly, right? Perplexingly, but in fact, it's not what you think. And this Atman project, of course, this whole thing about enlightenment is undergoing a lot of, let's say, different perspectives are now being tossed in the air, we could say. But going back to that, and now I'm speaking from the reality of situation. It's only last week, before coming here, a very well-known person released that video where he basically tries to debunk the claims of someone, if they claim that they're enlightened, that it is a sure sign that they are not. And of course, very eloquently, because the person is very eloquent in the way he speaks, the way he writes. He's done it all his life. He goes into this painstaking, meticulous, very, very rational explanation of why that is, and giving these definitions, which he repeats exactly word to word, perhaps so that we can write it down, at least we forget, that enlightenment or freedom is freedom from the person. So person can never be enlightened. And of course, there's a whole thread of comments, relieved and praising this, and it's like reassurance, all this and that. And I reflect on this and I ponder on that, and it's nonsense. And it's not even culturally supported, although person comes from that culture, completely made by that culture, genetically comes from that culture. Within that culture, the affirmation of one's status, in fact, is part and parcel of spiritual unfoldment. It is so well known. The four Mahavakyas, the great sayings of 8th century sage Adi Shankara, all of them are that, statements and reinstatements of one's status. What is it if it's not the confirmation of one's state of enlightenment? From Aham Vidam to Aham Brahmasmi, to Tattvamasi, to I am Brahma Atma, to all these different sayings, Shivoham, Aham Siddha, all these are the affirmations, reconfirmations of one's status. So, because they're spoken in Sanskrit, they mean something else, you see? So to me, it feels like this person is doing disservice, in fact, or jumping on a bandwagon of that whole silly circus of what we are now been witnessing for the last God knows how many years, because there is definitely a lack of confidence of certain teachings simply not delivering, approaches not delivering, and therefore one need to settle on something. We have in our curriculum the term that we've coined out some time ago called Jaded seeker. Jaded seeker, not because he wears jade, because he's tired, she's tired. And the only way to get justified all the years spent chasing enlightenment is to settle on these non-dual axioms. Simply settle on them at a mental level, which brings certain relief. You see? It brings certain relief that indeed all there is that. Yes, of course, all there is that. There's nothing other than that. One can never be closer nor further away to one's essence. That should set one free there and then. But enlightenment altogether is something else. My path into spiritual teaching was with this kind of going out from being in a very, very private sphere into public, was in being invited to the Science and Audacity conference whilst we were still based in Costa Rica as a family, to speak in place of a much more senior by age teacher whose name is not that very well known, but he is a teacher worth his salt. His name is Timothy Conway. Have you ever heard that? No? Timothy Conway. He lives in Santa Barbara. And his background is in TM, Transcendental Meditation. So Rick Archer was plotting Buddha de Gaspam, was plotting a panel for the conference in 2012. And that was meant to be all with TMers. John Hagelin, right, as the head of the American TM movement at the time, he stepped down recently, retired. You know whom? He's a quantum physicist, superstring theory, like hundreds of works, hundreds of essays. He's very well known. He was a third candidate for the United States presidency for some time in the past, in the 90s. Mark McHugh, a TM teacher from Vancouver. Timothy Conway, and it was meant to be monitored? Not monitored. Moderated, thank you, by Rick Archer. And they already had a theme. They already had it all laid out. The theme was there, and the theme was very interesting. That don't confuse awakening from self-realization. Don't confuse self-realization from enlightenment. And I already had exchanges with Rick prior to that several months, and we already had 2 interviews that since then he took down. Only 2 friends he made throughout all his career prior to that. The late Francis Bennett, who gone through transgender and became Fran, and he passed away as her, and myself. So I was involved in helping Rick conducting a lot of interviews, very complex ones, including with very, very different teachers from Sufi tradition, from Christian tradition. You wouldn't believe it. He wanted my help in preparation for the interview with Father Thomas Keating. No kidding. My knowledge in Christianity it's very, very basic. But of course, what's interesting in all this is that when this window opened up, because Timothy fell ill, he could not come, and they already planned, it's already in the program. So the very last time, at the very last moment, he calls me up when I'm Rita and I. We pack our suitcases and we go to California. And I present there. Very quickly, we need to do something, you see? Everything is laid out by Timothy Conway. This theme itself, you see? Don't confuse awakening from self-realization, and don't confuse self-realization from enlightenment, let's say, full enlightenment. And all have that background in TM, myself including, right? And the youngest being of all the three, the participants. We go on stage with just 2 brief evenings of preparation, going over. And of course, Rick wants us to follow what Timothy laid out. And I said, though I was like a new kid on the block, I said, I'm not going to go by someone else's plan here. You called me, I need to make sure I speak from my experiences and from my understanding. We're not going to change the theme. We'll keep the title, but we're going to do it differently, still in line with the teaching. And this is where you can go, guys, and watch that interview. That interview was not taken down because only my personal private interviews were taken down. My participations on panels are still intact on Buddha the Gas Pump. And this is the very first one. And not only that, because I suggested to remodulate that, I had to open it. And I opened it with the teaching that I carried now into the well into the second decade. If you go there, the first thing I spoke about, nature of experience. Who watched that interview? Yeah, do you remember? From get-going, from off the bat, I speak about nature of experience, which is comprised of seer, seeing, and seen. The togetherness, the Samhita of Rishi Devata Chandas. No tantric terms, no Kashmir Shaivism, strictly speaking to the Vedic curriculum as taught by Maharishi. And it's a beautiful panel. A lot of people were grateful because it brought clarity where everything was like in smokes and of like, I'm already that, yeah. Well, why am I then carrying all this? Like, why my mind goes like a squirrel in like if there is no enlightenment, like the whole thing is, you see? So what is the, let's say, how to bring this now for you to reconcile with your own, it's not, I don't think it's a dilemma. It's a simply, you're probably presenting it as a possibility, right? It's not like you're losing sleep over it suddenly. No, it's just like, you're hearing something and this, maybe strikes some resonance and creates this maybe reevaluation of where you've been so far. And it's very timely as well. And even Vedically speaking, you're completely in alignment as everyone else in this room with the movements of the planets. And we've completed Saturn 30 years and now casting out collective destiny within this next 2.5 years for the next 30 years. And then another sub-cycle, Rahu Ketu cycle, completed 18 years. And within the 1.5 years, we're creating another trajectory for this karmic axis for another 18 years. So you can measure that. How old are you? 52. 52. You look great. I'll give you that. Keep going, man, because I'm 59, so you still have some to catch up. But if you take it back to 30 years, that will make you what? 22. So now you can start making this just brief assessments when it all started. See, so you could feel, and then a sub-cycle of 18 years, and then that 18 year can also be split in half when the flip of Rahu Ketu and Ketu Rahu change sign. So that would make it 9.5. That's the sub-cycle of the 18 years. This is in line. Right now, all of us need to reevaluate everything we've been doing, everything we've settled on, everything we have pursued. It's simply being in line, like responding to a call. That's what it is. Universe vibrates, right? And this particular realm of ours is also obviously has this resonance that is marked and influenced by the planets. This is obvious. And so this reevaluation brings the necessity to question absolutely everything, revisit everything. So to bring it to closure, so that there is a sense of completeness as well. Because without that, it's like you need to clear the slate. And to do that, obviously, it is accompanied by this reevaluation of how far we have come, how far we have traveled. For those of us in the room who cannot trace it back 30 years because that will take us beyond being born, that means also something. It means something that we have come into this life carrying this cycle, because it doesn't stop by the appearance and dissolution of the body. It's measured in different realm. So I would say that your question simply brought something out into the open. And really, it gave an opportunity to kind of speak to this in the way that felt fitting, appropriate, and quite fun as well. But it cannot be yet a proper inquiry. You see? It cannot be proper inquiry yet. You understand what I mean by that? Because it's the first day. See? So you showed up like that. I'm grateful. It's very good. We didn't waste time to wait for someone. But it's not inquiry yet. Done. It's not inquiry. Done, you're not done. That's the bottom line. And you know that. And you're not here for no reason. If you're 52, if you were 22, you can still kick this, this way, that way. But you know what you're doing, right? So and therefore I don't want to fool you and tell you, yes, you are enlightened. Why? Because guess what? Don't tell that to anyone, because as soon as you say to someone you're enlightened, you're not enlightened. Why? Well, because that's what it was said by the authority figure. No. We will speak and develop this theme, the audacity and courage to claim what is truly is. That is an important aspect, because it's not just by virtue of how this is granted on a silver platter. Yes, grace, of course. But to understand the beauty, the symmetry, to understand truly how it all there, perfectly arranged here, how this expression is for the sake of one and only. So therefore, before we discard the individuality, we need to rise fully to what individuality represents. So the job of spiritual enterprise, in fact, is much more integral than a lot of teachings out there today that claim to be so, because they're lacking that dimension. They're lacking the dimension of that what this represents. You see? And we settle on false or fool's gold. This is what we're doing right now. In the spiritual communities, in the spiritual dialogues, there's a lot of that naked king parading. Or not a naked king, a new dress of the king, right? What is it called? Dress of the king? New dress? Emperor's dress. Yeah, emperor's new dress. There's a lot of that, emperor's new dress. And it will be blasted within these 2.5 years, because Saturn in Pisces completed the cycle. It's now re-entered Pisces. And its job now to wipe the slate because the next 30 years will be mapped out. So you will be witnessing, we will be witnessing all the false gurus, all the false leaders, all the blabbers who they speak like, all the Jordan Petersons, all those people who have gained authority and in fact shallow as anything, simply because they speak with a good accent, good manners, and they have eloquent command of the language. It's worth shit. Okay? It doesn't mean nothing because there's no integrity. Hollow personalities, demagogues. Jordan Peterson only given as an example. There are many people out there like that. It's a crumble and collapse of the authority figure per se. People who have been held in great veneration as political leaders, spiritual leaders, cultural leaders. We're witnessing there. It's everything is interconnected. What's happening with Didi in the court, all interconnected. All that stuff is being pulled out, right? All that nasty stuff, all that which was neatly hidden, completely, neatly hidden beneath the powdered, fluffy appearance of greatness. So it's a very good time. Personally, to me, it's a very good time for reevaluation. So you are doing that. You're reevaluating your goals, your aspirations, and where you want to be, who you want to be, what role you want to play, what you want to serve. That's my, let's say, reflection, feedback to what you brought.